Welcome to Mike for Men with your host, Mike Huey. Mike shares real talks for real men who want to make a real impact. There is a huge movement in the United States to take from the rich and give it to the poor. That concept is called socialism and has been tested by countries for over 100 years. In today's episode, Mike shares why socialism didn't work then and won't work today. And now, your host, Mike Huey.
Bobby is a extended family member of mine. Grew up in a single family home. Mom was not there as much, but he didn't have a lot of direction. He struggled in life in his early years as elementary and junior high. In fact, there was a point in time, because Bobby is a member of my extended family, moved in with us for a couple of years when I was a young kid, I think in junior high. Nevertheless, Bobby went on to make some unwise decisions, got involved, started doing drugs, different things like that. And somewhere he got an idea in his mind that he shouldn't have to work hard. And he valued some spirituality over hard work. And fast forward year after year, he kept asking for handouts. He kept saying, I need this. I'm living in my car. I'm doing this. And as the years progressed, he's now 60 years old. And at 60 years old, he's still completely in poverty. His physical well-being is a mess. His financial well-being is a mess. Horrific need of help constantly, and it's all from some decisions he made. Conversely, I have another family member in my extended family. I'll call his name Mark. Same thing. Grew up in a single family home. Mom worked. He had a couple sisters, but he had to just make ends meet. I mean, they did not live in any kind of level of affluence or wealth, barely enough to have food on the table. But Mark decided to grow up after high school. He tried to do what he could to get to college. Didn't finish college, but he started to say, I'm going to work hard. And he began doing things like being an outdoor door-to-door salesperson. I mean, if that's like the hardest thing to do, I don't know what is. I mean, talk about hitting the rejection and all that. But he worked hard year after year, eventually married into our family. And I watched him, and the guy wakes up early, he drives long to work, he works all day, he comes home, he's exhausted, work. Today, he's also in his early 60s, president of a multi-million-dollar company, doing very well. Two people, similar starts in life, but because of some life decisions that they made, not the government, not other people, not other family members, but because of decisions they made, their life is dramatically different. The struggle with socialism is that socialism takes away the individual decision to do what's in your best interest and let you have the consequences of your own choices. The socialism believes that the state or the federal government is more knowledgeable about what's in your best interest more than you are. It determines what you should own. If you have too much land or you have too big of a property, they decide that's too much for you and we need to give to other people. They determine what you should do for work and how much you should make for work. There are some countries such as Germany where you have to take a test, and that test is in 8th grade, not after college, not when you're 30 and you've tried different things. In 8th grade, you take a test in Germany, and that decides from there whether you're going to be a white collar worker, whether you're going to be a blue collar worker, what kind of job you're fitted for, and they decide what you're going to do for work. Most politicians that have run these federal governments or state governments, they're running organizations, the government that is a multi-billion-dollar, multi-trillion-dollar organization. And yet most politicians have never even run a company that's $100 million or even $10 million, let alone running this billion-dollar thing. So the idea that the government, a multi-trillion-dollar enterprise, knows how to handle your needs better than you do is a fallacy in socialism. different countries like the idea of it, and they've tried it. I mean, so the idea that we don't want people to be poor, we don't want people to be homeless, we don't want people to be starving to death, and we need to help. We definitely need to help these people. And so, because of that, there is definitely a strong internal need we have to provide for those people. In fact, many states have said, hey, many states, meaning many countries, have tried it thinking, hey, we got to do something. So England tried it after World War II. Israel tried it. India tried it. They all tried socialism after World War II. And from World War II in the late 40s all the way until about the end of the 70s, England finally decided, hey, we need somebody else. And a person named Margaret Thatcher came in and said, we need to end socialism in England because our production and our wealth has just dwindled away in the last 30 years. And England started back into a capitalistic society under Margaret Thatcher, and the economy turned around and it has continued to climb. Same is true with Israel. Same is true with India. India now is one of the economic world powers. They tried socialism. It doesn't work. China started socialism. In fact, probably one of the more extreme ones was Mao Zedong in the 1950s. They decided, hey, if you're wealthy, if you're professors and if you're business owners, we're going to take your money. And literally they took it by military force to give to the poor. That was the whole foundation of the Red Revolution. China's economy, I've been to China. People say, well, China's doing well. It's really not. I've been to Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Shanghai, Beijing, these places. They're all capitalistic centers where I meet with CEOs, and they're getting to own their own business, and they launch and they have 100, 200 employees. That's where the economy of China is doing well. But if you go into non-capitalistic pockets of China where it's being run by socialism, it's poverty. It is absolute poverty. Ukraine used to be what they called the breadbasket of Eastern Europe. Extremely abundant, huge cornfields and wheat fields. And yet when Ukraine, after the revolution in the 40s also, Russia took it over, turned it into a socialistic society. Now today they've still in socialism, and Ukraine is one of the poorest countries on the planet. Stalin promoted the concepts of socialism with the Bolshevik Revolution 100 years ago. In fact, it's now like 104 years ago. And the idea was, let's take from the rich, let's give it to the poor. And that's what the Russian Revolution was all about. Russia is still has never been the economic, they've been a military, but not an economic world power like they could be. And yet they have fields and farmland, and they've probably got oil reserves unlike anyone else, and they've never tapped into it because they've kept a socialism economic system rather than a capitalistic society. We forget that the whole World War II was really based on the fight against Nazi Germany, and the Nazi Party was literally called the German National Socialist Party. It was all about socialism. We have to take from this group and give to this group. And socialism has continued to stay in Germany even after the World War II, and that's why the illustration I gave, they still test their 8th graders and determine what they are going to do. One of the things that frequently some people say, well, what about the Netherlands or Sweden? Let me share with you my experience being talking with different people here in the United States that have come from those countries. I was interviewing I think his name was Mark, and Mark, he's interviewing to run one of our offices. And I said, well, where are you from? He says, I'm from the Netherlands. And I said, well, why are you here? He said, well, because my dad owns a company there, and he's being taxed at over 60%, that's 60% of his income. And he said, if you want to better yourself, you can't do it in the Netherlands. You have to get to America where they have a lower tax rate. The only reasons that those countries are doing well is they have two things. They have economic capitalistic some centers in the major cities, and or the oil reserves are being owned by the countries, and the revenues from that goes to pay the employees, which is the citizens of those countries. They're all on a welfare check, basically. Capitalism serves other people. Socialism takes from some people to give to others. Now, just to give you an idea around socialism and the ethics of wanting someone else's stuff and saying, hey, you have too much money, you should give to me. One of the 10 Commandments found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 15 says, you shall not covet, which means want or possess your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's servants, your neighbor's ox, their donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. In today's world, now that was written to an agricultural society, and so their wealth was based on their livestock, their oxes, their donkeys, their fields. It was based on they had servants, but today we would call them employees. And so it's, if to put it in a 21st century language, you should not want what your neighbor has. You shouldn't want their big house, their wife. You shouldn't want to run the business that they have with all their employees. You shouldn't want their wealth, and you shouldn't want anything that belongs to them. Socialism believes that wealth is limited. There's only so much. And so if we're going to provide for the poor, we have to take from the people that have some. Capitalism believes that wealth is unlimited. You can create wealth. You can do more with it. Let me make an illustration to help see different ways that wealth can be passed from wealthy people over to the poor people with an example of farming. So let's see that there's two farmers. One has a lot of opportunity and a lot of abundance. He's got 40 acres, which is not that big of a farm, but to make an illustration. And the other only has a couple acres. Now, the farmer with a couple acres, he's been struggling to make it. And he's looking at how can I get more seed to plant so that I can have a bigger harvest at harvest time to sell. So there's a couple things he could do. He could run over and steal seed. That is one way to take wealth from the wealthy and give it to the poor, is to go over and steal. And we see theft and robbery is a huge problem in our country. The other is to tax this person with some and say, we're going to tax your seed higher and take that seed and give it over to this person, which is basically the same process. It's just that instead of the person directly taking the seed, we're having the government or someone else take the seed and give it over. Another way is for this person, the wealthy one with 40 acres, to donate seed, to give in a charity or give to this person. And that is a viable option in America. We'll talk about that in a second. The other is to barter seed. Hey, I will, if you would give me a couple bushels of seed, I would be happy to give you time. You know, I've got an extra ox, I've got an extra tractor, I can do this, and you could borrow this, and if I could have some seed. So you could do a barter system. The other is to invest seed. That means that the farmer that has 40 acres, he could take a bushel of seed and say, I will invest this. I will be a partner with you, smaller farmer, and you plant this, you do the labor, and when it's harvest time, I'll take a percentage of it because it's my seed, but you get a percentage. So it's a way for that farmer to get more than they had, and for this person to be rewarded for investing. Those are simple ways that wealth could be passed in a farming situation. So let me address some more practical things of ways wealth is properly passed from the wealthy to the poor. More than any other system, it is passed more in the capitalistic system than it is in socialism. The struggle is that when we think about passing wealth from the wealthy to the poor in a socialist society, we want it like now. We want it in this election cycle. Capitalism is passed from the wealthy to the poor. It takes generations, but generations later, more wealth has been passed than any other system. If you drive into old East Germany, or you drive into the communist bloc of Eastern Europe, you'll see that now that socialism has run for generations, no wealth was passed. Families have to share one car. I mean, there's been no passing. You go to capitalistic societies since World War II, or over the last 100 years, and you see that even our poor people live in nicer houses than most poor people around the globe. And I'm going to illustrate that in a second. So, looking at housing, the wealthy people buy houses, and the houses that are wealthy in one generation become houses of the middle class the next generation. Houses that are of the middle class of one generation become the houses of the poor people in a generation to come. So townhouses that I lived in when in the mid 70s was a nice middle class townhouse level. Today, about 30, 40 years later, those townhouses are the same townhouses, but they are owned and lived in by people that have less income. The middle class is moving up in housing. Housing keeps growing, and we become wealthier and wealthier. Houses from one generation become the houses of the next generation, one level lower. You look at houses in most cities. You can see houses that are built 1940s, 1950s. Those houses were affluent houses when they were being built. Nowadays, they are houses of the people who we would consider upper, lower class or lower middle class, and yet those are the houses of the wealthy. So housing is passed down from the wealthy to the poor over a space of generations. Medicine is passed down. Medical procedures and prescriptions that only the wealthy can afford one generation, because the wealthy people are investing and those medical firms are able to take that money, reinvest into R&D, figure out how to mass produce this, figure out how to tweak it and make it more safe. They become the standard medical practices of the next generation for the middle class and the middle class to the poor. Look at that. When MRIs first came out, MRIs were only available for the wealthy. Nowadays, everyone can have access to MRIs as long as there's some kind of insurance, and that's another issue we can get into. Technology used to be that only the wealthy could afford technology, things like computers, things like cell phones. Nowadays, even the poorest people, a generation later, every poor person has access to computers, they're listening, or you might be watching this, listening on podcasts. You might be listening on a podcast on your smartphone, because that technology was only available with the wealthy in one generation. The very next generation, it's standardized. Automobiles. I can't tell you how many people own Mercedes or BMWs or Cadillacs that are in the lower class or lower middle class of our culture. And that may be through financing, might be through all kinds of things. But it seems like the automobiles of the wealthy in one generation can become the automobiles owned by the middle class or the one generation later, one level down. So the best thing I would encourage you to do is, instead of comparing yourself, like Exodus talks about, that when you're comparing what your neighbor has, and boy, your neighbor's got a great wife, and they've got a business, and they've got all this money, and they've got all these things they should take from them to give to me. Instead of comparing yourself that way, I want to encourage you to compare yourself to previous generations. Compare yourself, your economic level, to where your parents were at, what your grandparents are at. And you will see that here in the United States, and if you're listening in a capitalistic society, your standard of living is probably higher than what your grandparents were back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, things like that. My standard of living is higher than my parents' was in the 70s, 80s, 90s. So those are different ways that wealth is passed as illustrations. So we've talked about technology. Other ways that wealth is passed in a capitalistic society is scholarships. Huge problem we have is getting people into schools, getting people into colleges. Yes, the government's helping. Scholarships are a way for the wealthy people to help give to other people that are in a lower class to help. Adoption is another way. Instead of aborting children, wealthy people are able to adopt children who are going to grow up in a single family home or a no parent home, or whatever the situation is. They're able to help the poorest people globally by adopting them, bringing them into their own families. Charities, giving time, giving money to charities. Charities help the poorest of the poor. I served on a board a while ago, and I'll put a link to it here, but it's Life Center in Minneapolis, and they work with the poorest of the poor in Minneapolis and Chicago. One of the things they have is when people come to them, they have a 6-month life training system, and you actually go through how to set an alarm, how to pay your rent, how to get a job, all these things that are life skills. Guess what the very first thing they have to do when you join that program? From that point on, you have to rip up your welfare check, because they have learned, and this ministry has been going on for over 20 years, to take somebody who's the poorest of the poor, there's a mindset of poverty, to turn them, instead of being dependent on the state, to be dependent on themselves, their decisions, their work ethics. You have to get rid of all the aid and the support from the state, rip up your welfare checks, get involved in this program, learn how to be a productive member of society. And today there are people now, a generation after they've started, that have turned their lives around, made money, and are reinvesting into that organization. Because but that's one way, is to the wealthy people give time, money, or energy to charities to help reach their people, the poorest people in their city. Another way that wealth is passed in a capitalistic society to the poor is literally creating jobs. The wealthy people are able to start a company and create jobs so that other people have a form or a way of making their own money. I remember I was launching an office in Atlanta, and I went into an area that had I was like the only white person in this area, and I could see some of the kind of the snarls and the eyes lifting up as I went into this restaurant, and I was at a Japanese steakhouse place, so surrounded, with this big circle of people about ready to enjoy a nice Japanese meal. And one lady kind of snips at me, "So what are you doing here?" And I said, well, I'm here to create jobs. Because I was trying to launch an office and have that office employ about 15 people so that 15 families could have work. And it just took her so back, because she wasn't expecting that kind of answer. And that's really what wealthy people do when they create businesses. It's not just for themselves. A wealthy person can't create a company and become wealthy all by themselves. The sole proprietor is not going to be as wealthy as a person who creates a business. In fact, I'll put a link to Rich Dad, Poor Dad in the link below, and you can read what that does. So you've really got to have a lot of employees if you're going to create wealth, and the more employees you have, the more families have jobs. That's another way wealth is passed from the wealthy to the poor. Venture investing, we just talked about that with the farmer. If you're poor, you want to be able to make something of yourself. You can go to venture capitalists, you can go to other people and say, I don't want to take a loan because a loan puts me enslaved to you. I want to be able to have you invest with us. I'll do the work, you invest some capital, you give me some wisdom, some knowledge, I'll put it together, and for your investment of the money or the knowledge or resources, you get a portion of whatever we create. And so that is one way many people have created wealth, is they have received money as investments into organizations. Wealthy people also mentor other people. And I mentor a young man who's 30 years old in the inner city of Minneapolis. Provides great resource of joy and life to me. It provides great source of joy and life to him. He learns different skills that I've learned the hard way. But if you don't have resources to somebody like that, there's live mentoring, but you can go to books and you can get classes online. There's all kinds of ways that wealthy people say, hey, I want to be able to help another generation and another people, because the reality is somebody helped them. The last way that I can think of that wealth can be passed from the wealth to the poor in a capitalistic society is for the poor to come up with products or services that the wealthy people want and will pay for. If you want to start, one wealthy guy I know, he has a huge landscaping business, and it all started because when he was 16, 17, he started mowing lawns for neighbors, and they were willing to pay him for that service. And he kept at that business, and then eventually said, I need to grow, I need to get more employees. And today he owns a very large landscaping business in the Twin Cities. Socialism doesn't work because it does not incent people or reward people for their individual work. So I hope this has encouraged you to say, if it's really going to happen, it's really up to me to do it. Because I've noticed some people find excuses when other people find a way. So don't be a person of excuses. Find a way. Keep working hard. Have fun. Invest your money. Save your money. Don't blow it all on things. And get to the point where you're shifting more and more to become a wealthy person. And when you're a wealthy person, I've given you all kinds of different ways that you can share the wealth with the next generation.
Thank you for listening to Mike for Men. In the next episode, Mike shows you how to buy the car of your dreams with cash, no debt. If you enjoyed listening to this in a podcast, please subscribe and give us a review. If you are watching this video, please subscribe and click the bell below so you will know when the next episode comes out. If there is a topic you would like Mike or his guests to address, please write them in the comment section below. Again, thank you for listening.